All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Alan Fruzzetti, and I'm just delighted to be here and glad that you're here with us today or wherever you are. We're here to talk about a very important topic relevant for, in particular, parents of teens and young adults, but actually anybody in almost any kind of relationship. Um, I'm Alan Fruzzetti, and I been running DBT programs for more than 30 years and working with parents and couples and families for more than that. And I'm also the training and family services at McLean Hospital and faculty at Harvard Medical School, and along with Armida, the co-founder of the Center for DBT and Families. So I'm going to put up some slides and walk our way through this, and this, I think, kind of fun topic. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll also have time at the end for questions. I may take up a couple over the course of the presentation, and certainly more at the end. So let's start with slides. Okay, so here we are. So I've titled this a universal translator for parents, and of course, it's not just for parents. But before we talk about the translation piece of this, we have to give some context to close relationships and the very nature of good communication. So what we're going to talk about is this. We're going to start with understanding the relationship between accurate expression and validating responses. This is very central to our theme. If we're going to induce or create or grow more accurate expression for the other person, we've got to create a validating context. What's likely to get in the way are dysregulated emotions. They can get in the way, in particular, of accurate expression. Although you'll see they also can get in the way of our ability to validate. So one of the solutions here is to lead with love and curiosity, emotions, before we open our mouths. I'll talk a little bit about that, and then talk about how to validate to grow accurate expression, but also how to use validating responses to invite accurate expression. In that context, how to actually translate when our teen or other loved one says something like, "I don't know," or "leave me alone," or "I'm fine," or other thing that has some likely inaccurate parts to it, how we can possibly make sense of that in a meaningful way, and over time transfer that to something that's more accurate, easier to understand, and easier to validate. And as I mentioned, we'll end up with some questions. Along the way, we'll do a couple brief demonstrations as well. Okay, so fundamental beginning, which I think you've probably already seen on our website because it's our logo, is that accurate expression and validating responses are two sides of a relationship coin. If you think about it, if you say what your experience is accurately, it's relatively easy for people to understand. And if they can understand it, they're more likely to validate. So if I say, "Gee, I was walking across the street and this bicyclist didn't stop and almost ran me over. I had to jump out of the way. Whew, that was awful." It's actually pretty easy to validate. Say, "Wow, you were crossing the street, had to walk side. Wow, that sounds terrible." It's very easy to validate. Whereas if I say, "Oh, you can't believe this jerk that I saw as I was walking home from the store," very hard to validate. Well, we don't know what happened. We don't know what does it mean to, if you look up jerk in the Wikipedia, you don't see that person's picture, right? It's not clear what that means. So when we express ourselves accurately, it's a lot easier to understand. And when people understand, it's easier to validate. The good news is that validating also helps us clarify and be more accurate. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Now, what gets in the way is tricky. So I want to give you a quick primer on emotion and emotion dysregulation. you might already know this stuff, but it's only going to take a minute. It's worth 2 minutes. Okay, so the first piece is, oh, wait, brains. Yes, well, we have brains. We have these big brains. We're human beings. And this little slide shows us the evolution of our brain from top to bottom. We started out, pre-human, started out with a brain stem, which mostly has to do with movement and instincts and can be conditioned, right? So non-humans have brain stems. We still have brain stems. They control our movements and we can be conditioned. The middle of our brain, logically, evolved on top of the brain stem, and that's where emotion lives. Now, emotions, of course, in the beginning, were much more, very much more basic, but emotions did 100,000 years ago for humans what they do today, which is they give us information and direct our action. Emotions don't actually have to go through our thinking or our cognitive system. Emotions can be in response to something that's going on right in front of us. In fact, that's when our emotion system works best, when it's in response to something that's going on right now, because then the information it's giving us is very relevant. The tricky part is, wow, look at this number 3. When we start thinking and problem solving, we have executive function, all that cortex that wraps around the brain. It's on the outside of our brain that allows us to solve problems and think and use logic and have verbal memory and really complex language. All those really, really good things about being humans. They also can get in the way sometimes, because when emotion gets big, our thinking can get, shall we say, not so useful. So for example, that same situation where something dangerous happened, I might go to that same crosswalk and then experience fear, even though there's no danger. Because, wow, why? Because it's our emotion system is not giving us information in the present. Now, we can also have thoughts about things that happened in the past. We can remember, say, unpleasant things that happened, or imagine them in the future and create the same emotion as though it were happening right now. That's a little bit helpful when the emotion is small, right? We think about, oh, gee, it's April 25th. I gotta pay the rent or the mortgage or something, this week because it's due by the 1st. That little bit of fear, tiny little bit of fear, gets us to go and pay the bill. That's great. That's useful. But when we think about something that happened, say, 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago or 20 years ago, say, being in a car crash, remember it, and then we're overwhelmed with fear, not so helpful. Or we imagine something happening in the future, and then we have a lot of emotion about it, and especially if it's something that's not all that likely, we're really having our emotion system hijacked, and that's problematic. Now, it's especially problematic in close relationships. So let's talk about that for just a second. So the impact of emotion dysregulation, and emotion dysregulation is when emotion gets big enough to a tipping point where it's painful enough that what we're paying attention to is feeling better, and not so much the logical consequences of how we're feeling better, not so much a logical appraisal of, gee, is that actually a likely event or not? Or, gee, is that a memory from a long time ago? Is it actually relevant today? We're not at that moment, because emotion is so big, it's essentially turned off our thinking brain. Our brain works really well when our emotion brain and our thinking brain are balanced. We have both. Our thinking is descriptive and understands the emotion, and the emotion is responsive to thinking. Okay, thinking that's descriptive and in the present. But of course, what happens is when our emotion gets too hot, our thinking gets dysregulated. Thinking gets dysregulated. We can't identify our emotions very well. We can't figure out what it is that we want very well. And we, guess what? Can't express ourselves terribly accurately. Similarly, when our emotions get hot enough, we lose our ability to process information that's cognitive and language-based, and so it's hard to understand what the other person's saying. It's harder to understand what the other person is wanting. And so it's harder to validate their experience. We also can forget, oh, this is somebody I love. Okay. So here's the question. Okay. Anybody ever said something mean to someone you love? Anybody ever do that? Maybe. Okay. This is how I know whether you're paying attention or not. If you don't shake your head yes, then obviously you're doing something else, right? So that moment of saying something mean to someone we love is a dysregulated moment. I also want you to notice how normative that is. We all do that sometimes, okay? No wag finger shaking at you for this, right? Because this is part of being human. But at that moment, it's almost as though we forget that the other person is someone that we love and care about, and someone with whom we want to have a good relationship. Because if we remembered that, oh, you're somebody I love, it would be very hard to say, you big jerk. It would be really hard. Or you might have more colorful things you say at those moments, but I'm, for the moment, at least going to try to keep this G-rated. Okay, we might accelerate that later, but you'll see. But for the moment, right, it's as though, you big jerk, you can't do that if you're thinking, oh, I love you, I adore you, and you're driving me crazy. Notice, I love you and you're driving me crazy, or I really don't like what you just did. That requires real complexity, a real conversation between our emotion brain. You're driving me crazy, that's in the moment, and I love you, which is a much bigger picture from before and into the future, much more logical, rounded in accurate memories and accurate long-term goals, okay? We have both parts in front of us. It's much easier to say instead, I love you, but you're driving me crazy, which is so much easier to hear than you're such a jerk, or stringing together maybe even more epithets. Okay, so this idea of dysregulated emotion really gets in the way. Okay, and of course sometimes we say things when we get dysregulated. It's not just our thinking that gets dysregulated, but then we say things like, you big jerk. Those are dysregulated actions. Or we storm out and slam the door. Or we say, I wish I'd never met you. Or I wish you'd never been born. Or something else that's really pretty ugly, which of course we don't mean when our emotion comes down. The trouble is sometimes it does damage. And that's what we want to work on is doing less damage. Not zero damage, because we're always going to do a little damage, because sometimes we're going to get dysregulated, but less damage. Okay, so if accurate expression promotes validating and validating promotes accurate expression, inaccurate expression is much harder to understand, right? If somebody says, you're a big jerk, it's really hard to immediately translate and say, sweetie, I love you too, and I know I'm driving you crazy right now. Nobody does that, okay? And by the way, that's not where we're going. No one thinks you're supposed to be able to do that. But that would take the wind out of the other person's sails. It's just a little too much to ask. But the point is that when we're inaccurate, you're a big jerk, or I'm fine when I'm not fine, or gee, where'd you leave the car case? I don't know. Okay. Or what time are you coming home? I don't know. How was school? I don't know. Okay. That inaccurate expression, what does it mean? It's very hard to know, and it'd be easy to invalidate, because there may be an experience in there that's completely valid that we don't know about. And so our response can invalidate that without any knowledge or awareness. Or we could get so frustrated that I don't know, leave me alone, why are you talking to me? I didn't say you could talk to me. Those are inaccurate expressions that could be frustrating. And then we could become a little bit mean, which is also inaccurate and invalidating. So this is a kind of ugly cycle that we can get into. Guess what? If a person's dysregulated, if they have a lot of negative emotion, they're more likely to be inaccurate. Guess what else? If the other person's got a lot of negative emotion, it's a lot easier to be invalidating, even if the other person's a little bit accurate. So now we have negative emotion creating conditions that make inaccurate expression and invalidating responses more likely. I suspect you've been in some situation that looks like this. I've actually met people who could roll their eyes like that. Pretty impressive. Now notice that it's as though this teen knows what her parents are thinking, even though they're not saying anything. They got their hands on their hips. You kind of know what they're thinking too, right? And you kind of know what she's thinking. Okay, and here's a mom. The child's facing away, is clearly despondent and not responding. And poor mom is getting so frustrated. Like, what is the matter? Why won't you talk to me? Right? That inaccurate expression is creating a frustrating situation for mom. And mom, now she's got her hands. She says, what is the matter? Why won't you talk to me? What is wrong with you? Which obviously increases the demands on the poor kid. And whatever negative emotions she's already got, she's got more, which makes it even harder to express herself accurately. All right, so if we are going to be more validating, and that's our job, right? That's our job as parents. Our job is to create conditions to grow invalidating responses in our kids. That's our job. Well, we have lots of jobs, but that's one of them. Our kids' job is to work on accurate expression, but there are lots of ways to do that. So if we're going to become more validating, remember, you're driving me crazy and I love you, we got to get to the I love you part without leaving behind the what I don't like or what's frustrating or what I do want. But at the same time, we've got to do that without forgetting or leaving behind the I love you and I care about you. So we have to manage our own emotions first, because if we don't do that, it's going to be impossible to translate, because all we're going to notice is the part we don't like. We're not going to remember the love, and we're not going to then be tuning into the cues that are probably there. So part of translation, okay, so far we've got part one is managing our emotions, because if our emotions are too high, we're not going to be able to understand sophisticated communication. Number two, the other person might be giving us clues, and if our emotions aren't managed, we can't take out our magnifying glass and find those clues to assemble some hypotheses about what I don't know, or I don't care, or I'm fine, actually, or you're a big jerk, leave me alone, what any of those things might actually mean. So we're going to start with that. And of course, we're going to call this relationship mindfulness. That's going to lead to some kind of understanding, because remember, when we understand, validating is pretty easy. Okay, so the idea of relationship mindfulness, or the idea of managing our emotion, is we get to be frustrated, we get to not like something, and we've got to remember, oh, wait a minute, this is somebody I love, my lovely child here. I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean that sincerely, not sarcastic, not my lovely child, but genuinely my lovely child, okay, is also driving me crazy, but is also my lovely child. And then that's the love. And the curiosity is, what's it like to be them right now? Because they're saying they're fine, or they're saying they don't know, but they're not communicating that's accurate. Or I have other information that says that may not be accurate. So we've got to replace anger and fear with love and curiosity, because the driving me crazy part creates easily judgments. You shouldn't do that. Anger, or, oh my gosh, this could be terrible. Some version of terrible, which actually may not be happening right this minute. And so fear can show up in a very unhelpful way. So we've got to replace anger and fear with love and curiosity. And that allows us to not invalidate, which then creates room to validate instead. I like this particular quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, when you understand, when you actually get to the understanding, you are already communicating that you love. And when you love, you're already acting in ways that relieve the suffering of people. We've done a bunch of research, which I don't have time in our relatively brief webinar to go into, but part of that research tells us that actually when we pay attention on purpose and communicate validating kinds of things, when we do understand, that it has a direct impact on the other person's negative emotion, which comes down. So when we validate, emotion comes down. I bet you know that. I bet at some point you've come home and said, I had a terrible day, and somebody did not drop what they were doing and pay attention. Favorite moment, right? Like we call that an invalidating response, right? You kind of want to tug at the other person's earlobes or something else, right? And if the other person puts down what they're doing and they look up and say, oh, what happened? All of a sudden, oh, you're listening. And then you say a little bit about what happened, you describe it, about your emotion, and the other person says, oh my gosh, that sounds blank, whatever it was for you. Sad, disappointing, frustrating, scary, whatever it might have been, like, oh, you feel soothed, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning looking forward to being invalidated. Nobody plans their social life around, I want to spend more time with invalidating people. Okay, we all know that, right? That's intuitive, and it turns out that that's good emotion science. We've shown this over and over, that when people are invalidating, the other person's negative emotion goes up or stays up if it's already high. If it's already high, validating responses bring it down. So we're going to capitalize on this in a big way. Okay, so if a big part of the problem is this dysfunctional two steps, one person is inaccurate, the other person doesn't understand, and they get invalidated either in a kind of way or just I completely don't understand it kind of way, that's going to make inaccurate expression even less likely moving forward. You're going to get less, you're not going to get more. Makes sense. We've all had this experience, and we've all been on both sides of it. We've all reduced our vulnerability, or it feels that way, saying less and withdrawing when other people aren't listening, aren't paying attention, are criticizing or invalidating us. We've all, when other people are interested, when they're able to understand, trying to understand, we've all given more information, and they've helped draw those things out of us. Sometimes it even helps us understand our own experience. So if this is a big part of the problem, then a big part of the solution is to validate anything that's accurate. And here's the key, there's always something accurate. We're going to find those little accurate bits, okay? So validating soothes the other person's negative emotion, and that can reinforce, which just means makes it more likely, that's all. It's going to make it more likely that your child or other will be more accurate now and in the future, and eventually will experience more connection. That may happen quickly, like in that same conversation, or it could take a lot of conversations to build that, but it's almost inevitable. In our research, the amount of time it takes to get more accurate expression ranges from about 20 seconds to about 3 conversations. Anywhere in there. Notice I didn't say 6 years or when your child turns 30. I didn't say that. I said from 20 seconds to 3 conversations. Now that's with some help and coaching. So in real life, under less optimal conditions, yeah, it might take a little longer, but this is not a 2-year project, and that's important to remember. But it does sometimes require a fair amount of repetition. All right, so if validating soothes the other person's negative emotions, and then their brain turns back on, and then they might have a better sense of what they're thinking, what they're wanting, and then they might be able to give us more information. Oh, that's pretty important. Okay, so we're going to start with any wisps of accurate expression and validate those, okay? And we're only going to validate valid things. This is not about validating problematic things at all. No, it's about validating what's actually valid. We might not like it, but it's still valid. If my lovely child wants to do something that I don't want her to do, she still wants to do it. And it's valid for teenagers to want to do. That's valid for anybody to want what they want, right? Okay, so we're going to do a little demonstration of this, right? So the idea here is that there's something valid that we can validate, okay? And here are some ways that we could capitalize on this. Very simple things like saying, like just to communicate, I'm paying attention. I know, I'm tracking you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not criticizing or invalidating you. I'm trying to figure out what your experience actually is. Notice, I might not like it, but this is about accepting reality, okay? Showing love, showing interest. When something does make sense easily, saying, oh, of course. Right, well, that makes sense. Or sometimes, under some circumstances, me too. There's a reason why the Me Too movement is such a big deal, right? Because it's incredibly validating to have an awful experience and talk about what its consequences are for you and have somebody else say, me too, I've had that same experience. I know exactly what your experience is. Me too. This is not the sort of thing that you can say and when it's not true, okay? And parents have to be very careful with this because it's easy to hijack the conversation and have it be about the other person. But this is about me too. I know what that's like, okay? And then turn the attention back to your child, okay? And sometimes validating means we do what's needed. If somebody says they're hungry, we don't say, right? We don't just, oh, right, of course you are. You didn't have any lunch. We actually say, well, hey, there's some leftover in the fridge, or how about a sandwich, or something. Sometimes we just do what's needed. All right, so I want to just show a little bit about this. Sarah, are you willing to jump in there with me?
I am.
Okay, so this is Dr. Sarah Immerman, who is well, she can speak for herself, but is a terrific psychologist and dear friend, and also plays a mean adolescent at times. So is going to do a little demonstration here. So Sarah, so this is one where you're just shut down, right? But there's some cue available that I'm going to try. We have not rehearsed this because the idea is that in real life, I wouldn't know what's going on in advance, right? Okay, so Sarah, I come home and you're in the kitchen or and what do you look like? You're on your phone. Hi, sweetie. How are you?
Hey, Dad.
So, hey, sweetie,
Yeah,
how was your day?
it was okay.
Yeah. You look like you're deep in thought, deep in text, actually.
Yes,
Yeah. Who are you texting with?
my friends.
Yeah. Okay. You look maybe just a little bit. Hey, sweetie, could you look up for just a sec? Yeah, I know. Could you you look I can't tell. You look a little frustrated or sad?
Fine.
You're fine. Okay. Okay. Now pause for just a second. So, okay, I could accept that for now. So let's say, because there's nothing obviously terrible, but let's say I know Sarah and this is not her usual self, okay? But she's saying she's fine. So I might give her a few more minutes and I might come back and check, okay? And a few minutes later, I say, so Sarah.
Yes.
You definitely seem preoccupied. Is that true? Are you preoccupied?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram.
Yeah. Okay. Something fun or is this about like the end of the world? Because it kind of looks like it's about the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world.
Okay. Yeah, what is it? What's going on?
Nothing.
Okay,
Looking.
okay. So you want to come help me in the kitchen?
No.
Well, would you be willing to come and help me in the kitchen?
Sure.
Great. Okay, so now we're just moving. Okay, now this was not a disaster. I don't know if there's anything there. If there's something there, now we're doing something else. Okay, now this is a little tricky because she's not giving me much, right? So I'm trying to respond to what's there. I'm also sliding a little bit into the next section, which will be inviting something. It's hard to sometimes do one and not the other. But if Sarah were to give me a little clue about anything, okay, then I could capitalize on that, right? I could notice that and just acknowledge it, right? So I don't know. So I don't know what would that look like, Sarah? What would some clue be? Like,
It's my friend's birthday, so I'm just looking at the pictures.
okay. So oh, see, so I see that. So oh, so it's Marie's birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're here.
Yeah.
Okay, see, now I have loads of information, right? She's not saying, I'm so disappointed I want to crawl under a rock, but I could guess that she might be. So now I can say, oh, how come you're here and looking at Instagram instead of there celebrating? What happened?
Great question to ask Marie.
Oh, so disappointing, huh?
It's one word for it.
Yeah. Okay, so now I've got something, right? And in this particular little demonstration, I don't know, I don't know how reactive Sarah is. I don't know how far to push this, but I certainly could then, I can validate like does that make sense to me? Of course it makes sense to me. Well, that's really disappointing. Now notice what I'm not doing is probably more important here than what I am doing. I am validating that it makes sense to be disappointed, but I'm not being judgmental of Marie. I'm not assuming that anybody else has done something wrong. I'm not jumping on saying, I can't believe that she didn't invite you. You've been friends since 5th grade. What a jerk she is. I'm not doing all that. I'm also not saying, what did you do, Sarah? What'd you do to mess this up? I'm not doing that, right? And I'm not problem solving. I'm not saying, well, did you call her? I think you should call her. Is the party still going? You want me to drive you over there? I'm not doing that. Why? Because let me try that. Sarah, how's that going to work? Well, I think you should call her. I think you should call her.
No, I don't want to call her.
Well, why not? That's the obvious thing to do, right?
Dad, that is the stupidest thing you've ever said.
Okay, so can you see how my jumping to problem solving is misunderstanding entirely the situation from Sarah's point of view? Which I don't know because she hasn't told me. So I can't jump to problem solving, well, possibly until she's 30, but for now, at the moment, at least until she asks me to or is willing to. So I'm leaving problem solving aside. We're not even talking about that. It's just about validating the emotion. All right, Sarah, we're going to come back to you. Thank you.
Got it.
So you can put on your more your attack dog teeth for the next one. Okay, so I hope you can see that by validating the little things, it's building some connection and getting more information. Eventually, I got some information. Why does she look more upset than usual when she's on Instagram, when she's usually half amused? Because she's feeling lonely and sad because she's not with her friends at this birthday party. But it took some poking around the edges to get that information. Okay, so this can build accurate expression over time. Now, there are two possibilities, right, and everything in between, but there are two general cases. One is that in this conversation, I end up getting more information, and then I can validate that. That's great. But it might be that in this conversation, I don't get much, but I don't make it worse. I don't jump to problem solving. I don't invalidate anything. And over the course of several conversations, Sarah is willing to put a toe in and give me a tiny bit more information, which if I then validate and don't criticize, don't invalidate, might build to another piece of information until at some point, actually, we have a lot more accurate expression, which is a lot easier to validate. So validating can also invite accurate expression. It's not just in response to accurate expression. Validating can create more accurate expression. So now it's flipped around. On the left side, validating responses can lead to accurate expression, and accurate expression can make it easier and easier to understand, so we can be more precise and sometimes even bigger in our validating responses because we understand more. So these kinds of validating responses, and you saw a little bit of this with Sarah, what happened, how was blank, whatever she was doing, what's that like for you? Hey, what are you noticing? Or even, can I ask a question? The idea, a real curious question, not a what is wrong with you, which is not really a question, that's really a criticism, but a genuine question of curiosity, like, well, what happened? Or gee, could I ask about this? Or I noticed this. Gee, I noticed that you're home. I thought you were going to a birthday party. What am I right? Did I misremember that? Is that correct? And then Sarah could say, no, the party's today. And then I have a lot of information. She's not saying, I'm so sad, but I'm pretty sure she is, right? So then I can validate, like, oh, well, that must be disappointing. What happened, right? I can ask another question. What happened? And so forth. Notice there's not so much of the, are you okay, going on here. Notice I did not ask, are you okay? Which actually can drive many people crazy. Certainly, I'd say, yeah, you get one of these every other month. You do this once. Otherwise, probably not the greatest question to ask. Okay, so these are some of the things that will invite accurate expression. But I want to highlight that invalidating responses are anti-invitations for accurate expression, or they're invitations for less accurate or inaccurate expression. Going to get more inaccurate expression, more shut down behavior, or more attacks, right? Because when we get dysregulated, or when our kids get dysregulated, they're either going to shut down and withdraw, not give us information that way, or they're going to push back at us, tell us to leave them alone, be a little bit or maybe a lot caustic. Okay, so not making it worse is actually a great step at any moment. We don't have to solve this problem. I don't have to validate Sarah if I don't understand it. But if I don't make it worse, the door's open for 5 minutes later, or an hour later, or tomorrow, or another conversation next week. And over the course of several conversations, more and more connection will build, and more willingness to be accurate will show up. So we have to catch ourselves and inhibit or interrupt our invalidating responses. There'll be plenty of time in the future to validate if we don't make it worse right now. If we make it worse right now, it's like a step back. It doesn't mean we can't take another step forward later, but we've got some more ground to cover. So if we cannot make it worse, that's pretty great. Okay, so what might be more accurate? What are some of the things, if we get our language or interpersonal magnifying glass out, how is it that we could figure out what I don't know means, or what I'm fine means? Okay, how could we translate? So let's look at a few. This was by no means would be considered to be exhaustive, but let's look at a few possibilities. Okay, so one translation of I don't know might be, I'm afraid to tell you. Okay. Now, a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old might say, when you say, hey, who ate the last cookie? Okay, out of the cookie jar. The 2-year-old or the 5-year-old might say, somewhat without, guilelessly might say, oh, I'm afraid to say, I'm scared. I'm scared you're going to be mad at me. So they're really giving you loads of information, and you immediately know they ate the last cookie. right? Maybe they weren't supposed to eat the last cookie. Maybe they already had 17 cookies today. So that when they're afraid to tell you, by the way, it may or may not have anything to do with you. It does not mean that they're experiencing you as abusive or chronically critical. It simply may mean that they're having negative emotion. That negative emotion could be that you or somebody else has been critical of them, or it could be that they are judging themselves and are feeling ashamed about something. So the negative emotion is there, and it's fear, okay, or embarrassed, okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's because of anything that you have done specifically, okay? So now this is pretty important. It could take some time to figure this out. So when your child is saying, I don't know, what are some of the clues that we could look for that it's fear or shame? Okay. So first, we might have to ask some curious questions. We might find out more by saying, well, hey, what have you been doing this afternoon? How was math class? Today was report card day. Okay. It was report card day. That's a lot of information from some kids. They look glum and you say, hey, how are you? Fine. I don't know. Fine, whatever. Okay. That could mean I do know. I don't want to tell you. I don't want to talk about it because you might be mad at me. You might do something that I don't like, or I'm embarrassed because I'm judging myself. Like I'm saying that I messed up. I'm a jerk. I'm the jerk, or maybe you're the jerk, but there's some fear or shame. So we're looking for clues based on context. What actually happened today? What did the person do or didn't do? What else do we know about their day? Does Sarah hate her math class or her music class or her history class? Does she hate it because of the class or because of who happens to be in the class and somebody there bullies her or mistreats her, or the former boyfriend or girlfriend is in that class and it's just an awful place to be? There are a lot of possibilities. Those are little clues that we can look for and start to put some pieces together as hypotheses. It's like, oh, how is it? I know that, it's been a couple of weeks now since you broke up with so-and-so, or since you had this fight with so-and-so. How is that going at school? That's a good question to ask. It may or may not have anything to do with the person's mood right now, but it might. So we're looking for clues that might have to do with strong negative emotions like shame or fear. That's one place to start. A second one is that they're really struggling with something and they're actually worried about telling us because of the impact that it might have on us. Okay. Any worriers out here in the group today? Any worriers? Yeah. So for you worriers, this could be you, okay? Like, oh my gosh, mom or dad is a worrier. If I tell you that I'm struggling with this might worry you. And you already worry about so many things. I just don't want to be a burden to you. Now, hang on. Do not for a moment start to judge yourself for this, okay? I can see where you're going. Don't go there, okay? Let's just be clear. Don't go there. You get to be you, but maybe you get to be you with a little less worry, okay? That might not be bad for you or for your child. The idea here is to be able to say overtly, if you know that you're a worrier, and I'm using this broadly, okay, but if you know you are, to be able to say, sweetie, yeah, I worry, but you know what? I'm fine. I am solid. This is not, I can take care of my emotions. Just because I worry, I also deal with my worry. By the way, that doesn't have to be completely true. It just means you're working on it, right? And you're not going to let their struggle overburden you. This is good for you, by the way, as well as for your child. Now, when I say their struggle, that could mean anything from very ordinary pre-adolescent or adolescent or young adult behavior, like struggling with a friend, or getting ghosted by somebody, a new friend, or just struggles in a romantic relationship, or struggles at school, or getting a lousy grade, or whatever it might be. Okay, it could be any of those things, or it could be all the way to, I've had some suicidal thoughts lately. I've had thoughts about killing myself. That would be a bigger struggle, but I'm afraid to tell you because I know you'll worry, or you'll downright panic. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's true, by the way. It just means that's their expectation, maybe in their experience. So our job is to not panic. So if Sarah tells me, yeah, I had some suicidal thoughts, my first response cannot be, let's get you to the hospital. My first response has to be something like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're telling me about this. What's going on? Just interest. Notice that there's Sarah. She's still sitting here. She's talking to me. She's not doing anything dangerous in this moment. Okay, I'm not in any way suggesting you be foolhardy, but having a conversation is not dangerous. In fact, for those of you, whose kids are most of the time doing well, suicidal thinking is actually extremely common in adolescence. Suicidal thinking without any plan, without any attempt, is extremely common. And actually, the single biggest predictor of them not following through with a plan or any action is actually being able to talk about it, because not talking about it creates a lot of more distress. There's no help available. So this idea of not wanting to burden you could be very relevant. And by the way, and again, it could be something that's extremely ordinary and not the slightest bit dangerous, but they just don't want to burden you with it. They're whatever that might be. Okay. Now that could come out as, it's none of your business. That's a push away. Like, I don't want to burden you. I just say, hey, it's none of your business. Like, I would not tell you about this because it's none of your business. Or it could come out as, like, oh, no, don't worry, mom. Don't worry, dad. I'm fine. Like, where they're a little bit convincing because they're trying to tell you, like, it's okay enough to not go further. Our job is to say, hey, sweetie, like, whatever it is, I can hear it and we can still have a conversation. There's nothing so dangerous that we can't talk about it. And by the way, I think that's literally true. Okay. All right. So I don't want to burden or upset you. And then there's what I don't know means I just don't like it. And I don't like paying attention to it. I want it to magically go away. And when you ask me about it, it's not magically going away. So I don't want you to know about it. I don't want you to focus on it because that means that I have to think about it. Now, again, that could be from something that's very ordinary, that actually ignoring it isn't a bad strategy because there's nothing to do about it anyway, all the way up to it's like a fire, a small fire that if we continue to ignore it, it's going to get bigger. So it could be important not to ignore it, or it could be okay not. It could be important not to ignore it, or it could be perfectly okay to ignore it. It's really hard to know the difference. This really leaves parents in a quandary. The idea is to preempt this by saying, okay, you know what? I mean, gee, Sarah, it seems like there's really something going on, and big or small, we don't have to dwell on it, but maybe just say, yeah, there's something ugly in the box. At least I know there's something ugly in the box. And if you say, I don't want to talk about what that is, I can live with that. That's all right. So actually just getting right, that's shaping it, like acknowledging, yeah, there's something there. I don't want to talk about it. The something's there that's bothering me is accurate expression. And then if we can get good at welcoming that and not being overbearing over time, the next 10 minutes later or the next day, so what's in the box? What is that? The thing that that's not going well right now. All right, sorry that we leave our G rating for a minute. So this is the FU. How dare you ask me this? It's none of your effing business. Okay. Okay, now honestly, the first translation of this is pretty easy. What that really means is I am dysregulated. My emotions are now out of control. I don't know how to bring them down, and my judgments are sky high because I have so much negative emotion. Okay. Now here's the problem. Okay, that's an easy one to translate, at least at first. Can everybody see that? But when your child is like cussing you out, it might be hard to notice that. Okay. Okay. So Sarah, you willing to give this one a shot? So let's we could imagine, I don't know, some scenario where you're dysregulated about something. You're dysregulated that your friends are ghosting you and you didn't get invited to the party. It doesn't matter. Your boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with you. It doesn't matter. Okay. And you're clearly upset. Okay. And so it's very hard to take seriously the I'm fine. Okay. Okay. All right. So give it a whirl. What does this look like?
Come home from school.
All right. So
You ask me how it's gone.
I'm in the kitchen working on dinner. Sarah walks in the door looking like, hi, sweetie.
Hey, Dad.
What's going on? You look upset.
I'm fine.
Okay. Uh, fine. Which version of fine is this? This kind of looks like I'm somebody sticking needles under my fingernails. Fine. Is that kind of fine?
I said I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. Okay. Is that better?
Okay. It's just not that convincing, right?
God, I don't know. Okay. I don't want to talk about it. You always ask me questions. I don't want to, I just stop asking me questions. I'm not going to talk about it with you. Okay. So stop trying.
Okay, so now she's escalating. She hasn't actually used the F word yet, but a different kid might. Okay, so we're trying to keep this somewhat tame. Okay, so notice I'm now, it can look like I'm in a pickle, right? And in some ways I am. But what I have is a lot of accurate information. Her nonverbal communication is that things are not fine. It's just that her verbal stuff says that it's fine. I'm not believing the verbal stuff. Why in the world would I believe that? Okay, because there's no evidence that this is fine. Okay, and if she really insults me, Dad, what is wrong with you? You're the worst parent in the world. F off. Leave me alone. That is actually only this much about me. This is very important. Okay, it's only this much about you. So if we take that personally, we're going to get defensive, we're going to get escalated, and we're going to attack. And then it's not going to go well. It's just not. If I can let that go to the side, I can say, sweetie, I know you're saying you're fine. I'm going to hear that as you don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, so, finally.
Okay. But maybe I'll check in with you later because obviously something's distressing. Okay. God. Obviously, I love you. I don't want you to be so distressed. See, it's really hard for her to attack me when I'm doing what she's asking, sort of, but not right away, right? But what I'm doing is saying, I love you, care about you. Like it's a little harder to just attack. And I'm saying, I'll leave you alone for a while. Okay. I didn't say I'm going to leave her alone forever. I said I'm going to leave her alone for a while. And depending on our own relationship and what it might look like if she escalates, if this is a suicidal kid, I'm not going to wait till tomorrow to check back in with her, but I'm certainly going to give her time. And the next version is going to be, really, is this a good time for 1 minute catch up? Notice I'm asking her to participate in this, right? Is this an okay time?
No, it's never a good time. I don't want to talk to you about it.
Okay. Never is too long. So when I just need a minute. We just come on, sweetie,
You get 15 seconds.
15 now or later?
Now, get it over with.
Okay, so now I got 15 seconds. I got to take it. Okay, I just want to make sure that you're only miserable. What's your,
Only I'm
yeah.
really miserable.
Yeah, so what's your plan to bring it down, to try to feel better? What's your plan? Do you have a plan?
What? I don't know.
Anything I can do to help?
Leave me alone.
Besides that, anything else?
No.
Okay. Now, plan B, well, okay, this is plan A and B, by the way. Plan B is not a failure. Plan B is just the next thing. I got some, believe it or not, I hope you can see there's now some communication going on. This is better. Okay, it's not a great the end of now I can check in with her. Now, this is Sarah. I'm going to send her a text in a half an hour that says, hey, sweetie, I'm going to the store. Do you want anything?
And I'm going to write back a tub of ice cream.
Okay, see, now victory is ours. Okay, now we're on the home stretch. Do you see? I got something that was accurate expression that she likes, that's actually going to be soothing. When and then I can write back and say, what kind?
Coffee.
Okay, and then I can send back whatever dumb dad emoji sends back to Sarah. Okay, whatever, guilty as charged. I do this, right? For adult children, but still they get dad emojis, little somethings, and then that's just like she rolls her eyes. But I don't know, Sarah, are you feeling loved?
Yeah.
Is it trickling in? That's the key. If it's trickling in, we're building the bridge. This is not a disaster. This is not a disaster. I may not know until tomorrow or the next day or next week what's actually going on here, but I will eventually, and then we'll be able to move on. Okay. All right. And then last but not least is the translation is, I don't know right now because my head is spinning inside. My emotions are so big, I don't know what's up and down. I can't focus. Okay. Now this is really hard, right? Because sometimes kids might need professional help with this. But what we can do is say, okay, this by the way, this Sarah wasn't quite there. She was almost there. But this is like just outrageously like, leave me alone, let's go slam the door or something else. And then it's just sending a text that says, if you need anything, I'm in the kitchen. Okay. So these are small validating statements that are actually going to help bring emotion down. Do you want anything at the store? And so forth. And that's going to help. Okay. With patience, we can build more accurate expression over time. Maybe in this conversation, but over time, if we can keep validating, remember, love and curiosity, if we keep communicating. I don't know how many sweeties I had out there. By the way, I have not copywritten sweetie. I tried, but they wouldn't let me. So you can use sweetie if you want to, but you can use the preferred term of endearment. But over time, that communication of love and curiosity is an invitation for more information. And then those very simple things like, glad you told me, I didn't know that. Gee, that sounds really hard. Some very simple, short, validating statements are going to be enough. So patience, we can build patience and skill and keep trying over time. Again, it doesn't take years, but it might take weeks and months. When we do this, okay, we keep focusing on validating to build accurate expression. At some point, it clicks. And when it clicks, we both feel a sense of connection at that moment. That is like the glue from which we can then do this again and again and again. Now, you have to keep doing it, right? By the way, again, sometimes we're going to invalidate. That's okay. It's a ratio. If we can validate more than invalidate, that's going to build connection over time. We're not looking to have zero validating things and 100%. Sorry, we're not looking for zero invalidation and 100 validating. We're not. We're looking for more validating than invalidating. And then you can kind of repair things and things feel a little better. All right, so go ye forth and validate. And I'll take up some questions. Don't forget to soothe your own emotions and take care of yourself, because sometimes these things require other adults to support us because they're not necessarily so easy.